I think the birds are having a good time feeding. We're ready for you to, you ready to take the mic?
Yeah, if you guys are ready for me, I'm going to give other stuff first. So.
No, we'll cover those later. Okay. You're the board. I don't want you to get bored.
Like you said, I'm a biologist at National Fish Hatchery. So I just brought a little slideshow here. I'll talk about what we do in the hatchery, and then I'll kind of dive a little more into the mussel specific stuff in more of a general sense too. So the screen's a little small, bear with me. If you guys need to see anything at the end, you want to come up to my computer, I can go back and show you some stuff too. And then I have some of our sampling gear that you guys can kind of check out at the end as well. So this is an aerial view of the hatchery. We have most of the ponds are filled here. That's our entrance sign right there. So when you come by, you'll see this out front, and then we have a little public aquarium that's open every day but federal holidays. We have about 53 ponds, and they average about 0.8 acres. Some of them are up to an acre, some of them are a little bit less. And we're the third largest federal hatchery in the Southeast region. So the early species, when the hatchery first started in the 1930s, we originally were doing largemouth bass, bluegill, red ear sunfish, and channel catfish as part of our recreational fisheries and to supply food to the local community and to the farmers because it was the Great Depression. And so we were part of that really important asset locally to help keep people fed and keep farmers moving with some of that stuff. So today, we still do recreational fisheries, but we've also added some different stuff. There's different mandates. We have the Endangered Species Act, which came about in the 1970s. And so we kind of have 3 different levels of work that we do, and then we do some control of non-native species. So our recovery work is kind of our highest level of work, and that's for anything that is federally listed as threatened or endangered. Some species are listed at a state level and not a federal level, or vice versa, and some are listed at both. Some may be state endangered and federally threatened, but as long as it's federally threatened, that falls under recovery for us. We have recreational fisheries, and that's on both federal and state lands. That's for the public to enjoy. We also work with the tribal nations around here. And then restoration. These are for populations that are declining or depleting. And so we'll work with species like paddlefish and alligator gar, and then alligator gar also double as non-native species control. And so at the hatchery, we currently have 2 species that are federally threatened. We have the Louisiana pearl shell mussel, and then we have gopher tortoise. And so we have ongoing programs for both of these species right now at the hatchery. Recreational, we work with the state, so we work with LBWF. They survey a lot of the waters around here, and they have a 5-year rotation of stocking that they do typically. And so we'll work with them. We have all the ponds, and they'll bring us larval fish, and we'll help grow them out, and then they get stocked all over the state. A lot of stuff goes into Toledo Bend and Black Lake and the big concentrated areas with a lot of fishing pressure, but we stock out the smaller areas with them as well. Restoration, like I said, we've got paddlefish, the alligator gar fall under here a little bit, and then we also have alligator snapping turtles. So we have a Head Start program for those guys, and they're actually a candidate species. So a different part of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is currently reviewing all the data we have across their whole range to decide if they're at a level that can deem them threatened or endangered at the federal level. And so we're waiting for a ruling to come out to say if they get listed or not, and then they'll end up in our recovery program at the restoration level. And then our non-native controls, alligator gar. These guys, one, they're a local megafauna. People find them very cool and interesting. Their populations are declining in some areas, but they're really good at eating invasive fish like the carp, silver carp and big head carp. And so we try to put a bunch of these guys out in areas that are being affected by those species right now. So recovery, we've got the Louisiana pearl shell mussel. This is where I spend most of my time. These guys, like I said, are federally threatened. They're only found in Grant and Rapides Parish here in Louisiana out of the entire world. There's the Alabama pearl shell, which is found in a few locations in Alabama, but they've fully diverged over time. And so these populations have been declining throughout the past several decades. And so our job is to help try to improve those populations and to get the numbers back to a stable, self-sustained level. So they inhibit, they're found within small streams, which are seep fed. So in the summer, they only get up to about 70 to 75 degrees for the most part, where most of the water around here is really warm. The water is really clear there, really shallow, typically swift moving. So they're found in a really unique ecosystem throughout the state. A lot of their beds are found throughout Kisatchie, different areas of Kisatchie, but there's also a lot of them on private land. So we work with the U.S. Forest Service to do a lot of the Kisatchie work, and then we also work with the state. They do most of the private land work. So we have two local broodstock sources where we collect adults from to do our program, which we'll get into a little bit more later. And one is on each side of the Red River because they are genetically distinct populations from each other. The Red River acts as a barrier for those two mixing. So we try to replicate that in our production. The main threats to these guys are habitat destruction. Beaver dams can be bad for these guys. They dam up one of those creeks, the water starts to warm and it gets above their threshold. Other places beaver dams are great, but not specifically for these guys. And then increased sediment load. A lot of this is ATVs, construction, infrastructure, forestry practices, farming, that kind of stuff. So the runoff will come in and bring in too much sediment. So this is just kind of the life cycle of the freshwater mussels, and they actually have a parasitic life stage. And so the adults, what will happen is the males will release their sperm into the water column, and as the females are filter feeding, they bring that sperm in and they fertilize their eggs. And then they'll brood those for a little bit, and when they're ready, they have to get attached to a host. And it's typically a fish, or some mussels use large salamanders like hellbenders and mud puppies. And then once it's on the fish, each vessel has a different time period, which it'll stay attached to the gills or the fins, and then they'll drop off into the sediment where they'll grow back into adults. And so we'll dive into that a little more specifically later too. If you guys have questions during this, feel free to throw them out.
So how long is the life cycle?
Each mussel is a little bit different. So for Louisiana pearl shells specifically, they take 7 to 9 years to become reproductive. Other mussels can reproduce within the first or second year. So these guys are a little bit longer lived, I think upwards of 30 years. Some species of mussels only live 7 or 8. So they're all just a little bit different. So our two main roles to work towards recovery at the hatchery is to captively rear individuals for stocking. So we're trying to produce those numbers of individuals that aren't happening in the wild right now, and then determine the life history and the requirements needed to get them to the adult stage. And in that, we'll figure out maybe what's happening in the creeks and the rivers that is not facilitating that for them. We're looking at road stream crossings. We've gone through in the Grays Creek dry prong area. There's been a lot of work out there to rate each of the road stream crossings and culverts to see what degree of failure they're in, or what things may be causing issues for fish passage, which we'll talk about a little later, how the fish are really important. And so we're one piece of the puzzle. So other people are working on the culvert stuff, but we also are out there seeing those issues and helping to report and collect data on that.
So you're actually trying to grow them in the hatchery there?
Yep.
So providing like host fish for the parasitic stage and all
Yep.
that? That's pretty complicated.
Yeah, it can get really interesting. And so part of the hatchery work that we've done with this captively rearing stuff, you kind of have to start at the bottom sometimes. You got to figure out which fish is a host. Some mussels, they're kind of a user of all fish, and they can reproduce on anything. And then other species have 1 or 2 fish that they'll use. And I think we've looked at about 30 different species of fish that could be found in the same areas as the mussel beds, and we've only found that grass pickerel or chain pickerel will produce transformed mussels into juveniles. And so after years of trying common species that you might find, like the darters and the shiners and all this stuff, and not getting any transformations, with the Alabama pearl shell, they actually found that redfin pickerel works. So we tried grass and chain pickerel over here, and we got transformation. So now we know our host. So now we can say, okay, where do we got to get host fish from? How do we not deplete the host in the wild? Should we have a production program for them? And then kind of work up from there and figure out what they need.
Okay, that brings up a serious question, because I know around here, there's some idiots, I've dealt with them. If they catch a chain pickerel, they kill it. Well, because you told us, and I dealt with one person like that. I won't go any more further than that. We love it because it's a great fly fishing
Yeah.
species, and I release all that catch. Is there a problem if you don't have chain pickerel in that system that you used to have? And then you can't propagate this muscle?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we need to take into account as we're developing these programs and
So
looking
you
at the
almost have
data.
to think maybe that you might have to raise chain pickerel or redfin pickerel. I'm not really-
So that is an option in areas, but we need to figure out what the carrying capacity for an apex predator is. You can't just put hundreds and thousands of pickerels out there, because then they will eat all the fish. So we have to go back into the data and figure out what the abundances used to be, and then if they've changed while the mussel populations are decreasing. Because if they haven't changed, then it might be another factor. Maybe it's the movement of the fish, and I'll get into some more of that a little bit later.
Can you, we're also capturing here, there's some
Okay.
people on Zoom, if you can just speak up just a
Okay.
little bit, that'd be
Yeah.
awesome.
I got a question about your host fish.
Okay,
Where did y'all determine that chain pickerel was a host?
so in the lab
lab?
setting, yep.
Because these small streams like out here at Kisatchie,
Mhm.
there's not that big a population of them naturally in them,
Yeah,
and that's shallow water. So I mean, y'all are using the chain pickerel as a host to get production to put the pearl shells back in the streams, right?
Yep. So yeah, we collected some wild ones the first year, and then we held on to those, and they've spawned in the pond. So we've used their progeny basically to do the next several years of the program, and that way we're not taking them out all the time. There will be years where we need to take a few here and there, but we try not to use too many. A fish can transform between 1,000 and 6,000 mussels, so we don't need a huge number of them all the time.
How large are the mussels when they attach to the fish? I'm envisioning this 2-inch mussel hanging off. the
No.
side of the chain.
They're so the Louisiana pearl shell is about 70 microns. So it takes 1,000 microns to make a millimeter. So I have to use a microscope. They're tiny. And then once they grow and they transformed into a juvenile from a larvae, they'll drop off at about 0.3 millimeters. So they grow quite a bit, but they look like tiny little pieces of sand in a petri dish until they get bigger. And I've got some pictures and stuff. They're kind of hard to see. But basically, so this is kind of like how we do our captive rearing at the facility. So we'll have our host fish in these green tanks, kind of over here. And so we have one fish per tank, since these guys get really aggressive with each other. We don't want to stress them out anymore. So we keep them kind of on an individual basis. We feed them every day, we clean them, all that stuff, keep them healthy. And then when the Louisiana pearl shell females are ready to go in the spring, we go out every week and we check the adult females. And we actually open them up just a little bit, and in their gills, you can see that they are now gravid or pregnant and ready to likely release their larvae. So we'll bring those females back to the hatchery, let them release the larvae into a small bucket, and then we take those little larvae out and we put them in a bath with the fish. So these buckets right here, each one of these has a pickerel in it and about 1 liter to 1.5 liters of water, and then each one gets an air stone. And then once we've enumerated our larvae, we put them in the bath with the pickerel, and the aeration stone keeps them moving throughout the water column. And as the fish breathe, pulls them through the gills, and they start closing up on them. So that's how we get them infested onto the fish in the lab. In the wild, with this particular species, they are a broadcast spawner, so they have millions of larvae. And they rely heavily, to our knowledge, on the timing of the pickerel spawning. So when the pickerel come up the creeks to spawn, it's the same time that these mussels are releasing. So they're likely to run into or encounter Lochledia through the water column. Other mussels will use some different kinds of mechanisms, and I've got some really cool pictures of that later. But the pearl shells, they just, to our knowledge, they just have lots and lots and lots of them, and just keep putting them out and just hope that it runs into those fish at the same time.
So whereabouts do they hook onto the fish? Primarily on the gills?
On the gills, yeah.
Okay.
And I'll have a little picture, I don't know what that looks like later too. And so once they're on the fish in those buckets, we put the fish back into those green tanks, those we call those Z-halves. And then this particular species of mussel will stay on that fish for about 30 to 50 days before they start dropping off. And so I use these little tiny catchers with mesh that I built, and I put them behind the tank. And as they drop off onto the bottom, they get sucked up the back, and then I can count all the mussels. So some years I've only had a few hundred mussels, and some years I've had 40,000 drop off. And so we figured out the transformation part of it pretty well. Each female is going to have more or less success. And then if fish have been used in the wild before, and we don't know it, they have a little bit of an immunity to accepting those on their gills. They've kind of built up a resistance. So we may have a little bit of a dud fish or a dud female. So we try to use multiple females on multiple fish, so we have our best chance of some success. Once they drop off, we use various types of systems to grow them out. And so we typically start with some kind of static tank. It just has water, food, and sediment in it. And the little tiny mussels, which this picture is really bright, but we have a little one right here. They have a foot. That's the appendage that everyone tends to call the tongue. It slides out, kind of looks like a tongue, but that's their foot. That helps them orient. But when they're really young, they use it for feeding. So we call it pedal feeding. They go out in the sediment and they grab bacteria and algae, and they suck it back in. And then as they get older, for this species, they start filter feeding. So we have to provide them food in the sediment before we can get them filter feeding. So we take sediment straight from the creeks where they are from, so that they are getting the same food that they would in the wild. We don't want to change too many variables for them. Hopefully that's not one of the issues, is the sediment as we move through the program, but there tends to be less flatworms and other issues in the native creeks compared to the ponds at the hatchery. So we take sediment right from the wild. So like we talked about a little bit earlier, we had to figure out what the host fish was. And so this took several years of figuring out when do we know when the mussels are gravid. Mussels fall into two categories. You have long-term and short-term brooders. And so the long-term brooders, you will find females that look ready in the fall, and they'll hold them all winter, and then they'll release in the spring and summer. And short-term brooders will typically, they'll become gravid in the spring. There's about a 3 to 4 week window that the whole process goes through from when they accept the sperm, fertilize, and then release the larvae. And so these guys happen to be a short-term brooder. So for many months they were going out and they're saying, we don't see anything different. We don't know. And all of a sudden, oh, we see it now. So now we know in the spring, we start in mid-February, going out into the creeks, checking mussels. And we usually go once a week for the first couple. And as the temperatures rise, usually once we hit 60 degrees, we know that the mussels are gonna start charging that, moving through that process pretty quickly. So if the temperature keeps going up, it'll go faster. And if the temperature comes back down a little bit, it'll go slower. But we can kind of gauge via temperature how ready the females are gonna be and how often we need to go in the creek. So they use different fish. There's a couple pictures. I'm not sure what kind of shiners over there. And then they tried brown bullhead. That was supposed to be one for a while, and we never really got anything. And then once the other species, the Alabama pearl shell folks, they found pickerel. So we tried that, and we've got really good success. So this picture right here, it's a little bright, but this is actually one gill arch from inside of a pickerel, and all these little dots are mussels that are attached onto the filaments. So those are our parasites.
So in the wild, like the fish that are native in those small spring-fed creeks, like long-eared dollar sunfish, striped shiners, all of those, they don't use those. You haven't found that they use those as hosts. Huh?
So, so what were they using here where there's none?
There's not.
That's what they figured out yet.
Well, they'll use the pickerel in the wild. Yeah.
But they're pickerel in those small, I mean, we've never seen a pickerel.
So the grass, the blue, not the chain.
Yeah, both of them will be in there, but grass are definitely more prevalent. But it's a short window when they're in those areas, because they hang out in certain area time of the year, and then when they're ready to spawn, they go further upstream or further into the tributaries. And so they'll overlap with these mussel beds more often during that time.
So is that visible with the human eye without, on the gills?
Yeah, a little bit, and there's a picture in here later. It just kind of looks like there's little sand dots stuck to their gill, but you can't tell that it's a mussel unless you know what you're looking for. So then we have, we'll get back into the mussels in a more general setting at the end, but so we'll just stick with the hatchery stuff for right now. So our other recovery species is the gopher tortoise, and so this is a Head Start program. Emmett is the other biologist that he's my counterpart over there, and so he's kind of in charge of this program. And so he actually goes to the Hattiesburg area in Mississippi and collects wild eggs. So the picture on the right is a nest that they recently uncovered of gopher tortoise eggs. And then on the left, those are the hatchlings that came from that. And so the Head Start program is really cool because we get wild genetics. The tortoises do what they're gonna do, but then we just give them the best chance of hatching and surviving. So in the wild, some areas have 0% hatch because of usually predation, but so you'll get raccoons and possums and other mammals in there, fire ants, sometimes natural disasters, and so they'll get no production for the year. So when we go out and collect them and incubate them, the last 2 years, we've gotten about 75% hatch of these eggs. And then we'll grow them for 2 years. And then from there, they'll get released back to where they came from. So we know the location of each clutch, and they'll get put back out into the landscape there. Eventually we'll work with the ones hopefully here in Louisiana, but there's a bunch of paperwork we have to get through with the state and stuff first. They're considered a keystone species. Part of the reason they have the name gopher tortoise is they're a burrowing species. And so their burrows are really, really important on the landscape. They're typically found in the longleaf pine forest. And so it's kind of the barrens underneath, and it's just some needles and a lot of sand and a lot of dirt. And through doing research on these guys, it's been noted of upwards of 300 other species using those burrows either at the same time or after they've been abandoned. So they found owls and snakes and frogs and spiders and all sorts of stuff using these burrows. So they're really important to that whole ecosystem that these guys are out here digging around. And so this is kind of what a burrow may look like. And so some of the animals will hang on the outside, waiting for stuff to come out. Other stuff will use it as their own home and nest. Sometimes they live together. Sometimes they just try to ignore each other. But it's really important to those areas that they have these deep burrows, because a lot of things like the frogs and the amphibians and reptiles, it gives them a place to go retreat from the heat, and it gives them some moisture. It's nice and humid down there.
How deep are those holes?
I think they can go, I think they can be like 10 feet wide and 40 feet deep, somewhere around that. Maybe I have those flipped, but they're pretty big, and then they have tunnels that come off of them. Other stuff will go in there, like you saw the skunk on there. They'll actually dig, towards the top, their own little burrow. Other stuff will go the other way, and so they kind of just starve everything for some stuff. This is the range of the gopher tortoise. So the yellow area is where they are, is like where the main part of the range is. But this part here, that just catches the Lake Pontchartrain area of Louisiana, that blue, that's where it's actually federally threatened at. So the other part of the range, they're actually doing pretty well. They have larger clutches and more survival. So we don't know what it is about this area that they don't do as well, and they have smaller clutch size. So we're working to help them out more locally. They have programs in Georgia and Florida for these guys. A lot of people have them in their yards in Florida. And so they have little gopher tortoise parent signs, and they watch over them and make sure they can hatch and all that stuff. So people really like them. This is just a couple more pictures. Emmett's collecting another nest, and then this is how we incubate them. That's vermiculite, so it's a synthetic substrate. And then these are all our buckets that have them in them. They have heat lamps and water dishes, and they get little PVC tubes that we fill with sand every morning, and then they dig it out every day. And then we feed them a mixture of lettuce and vitamins and different things. They get baths to help them hydrate, and they get a little spray with a water bottle for hydration as well. Part of our restoration work is alligator snapping turtle. So this is another Head Start program. Most of the snapping turtles we have are from the wild. They're from the Black Bayou Lake National Wildlife Refuge. ULM collects eggs, incubates them, and then we take the hatchlings and grow them out at the hatchery. We do have some turtles from Tishomingo National Fish Hatchery in Oklahoma, and that's part of a mitigation project where we just needed more individuals. These guys have been declining through their whole range. So we anticipate they may get listed as at least threatened, but we're not really sure. And they have the same kind of problem with predation as eggs, and they'll have as little as 0 hatch in a year. Raccoons, ants, other mammals, just people activities and whatnot. So we try to grow them a couple of years, get them strong enough and big enough to where nothing's gonna mess with them, and then we stock them back out into their natural areas as well. These are just some little tiny turtles. One of them's getting a pit tag, and so that's kind of the same technology that your animals have when you get them scanned for a tag. So if they get caught in the wild, you can scan them and they'll know if they're a hatchery turtle or not, and where they came from and what year they got stocked and how big they were. This is as they get larger. So this is a little bit closer to stocking size. And so they've worked on a 5-year study to determine the survivability of these. And they found, I believe, I think it was about like 84% or so that they deemed were likely surviving after it. And then they found different areas that are refugia for these. So national wildlife areas, Barksdale, a lot of Air Force bases and different military bases are actually really nice because they're minimally disturbed, and public can't just go on there and do whatever they want. And then we're working on some life history studies, and by we, I mean the whole service, not just Natchitoches. And then this is one of the large ones that we had on site. We had about 30 adult turtles on site a few years ago as part of a federal court case. There was a illegal pet trading, and so we had to hold the evidence while they were waiting to hand out sentencing and everything, and then they got stocked back into Texas where they came from. But it was pretty cool. That turtle was about 170 pounds.
How old was it?
I have no idea. Probably 50 to 80. Non-native species control. There's several thousand per year that get stocked into Louisiana and Tennessee waters. We haven't done as much of this in the past. Private John Allen National Fish Hatchery in Tupelo, they've been doing a lot more of the alligator gar work. They're a little closer to the Tennessee area that they're really trying to put some pressure on. And then they help control silver carp and the other invasive carp in the Mississippi and some of the big tributaries off of there. Just a photo of a small gar eating a minnow right here. These guys can be really hard to raise. They cannibalize each other very heavily. So sometimes you end up with 20 big fish instead of 200 medium fish. And then why is invasive species control important? First, invasive species are non-native organisms that have potential to cause harm to the environment. Sometimes these species are things that we brought here, not realizing the effects. But a lot of times they're brought in through other vectors. That can be moving bait buckets around, boats, shipping, stuff like that. And so the map on the right is the most current spread of zebra and quagga mussels. Those are invasive mussels from the Caspian Sea area. I'm like we said earlier, I'm from Michigan. That was the first place that they were brought in via shipping. And having seen them take over the Great Lakes, they are a species that if you can avoid having them in your waterway, you want to avoid having them. The biomass becomes huge. They take out all of the nutrients. They cover and attach to everything that's a hard part, including our native mussels. They'll actually get so thick on them that they suffocate them. They'll cover your boats, they'll cover your pylons, your ladders, they'll get in any kind of pumping hose that you have, they'll be on your ropes. They're really sharp. I've been cut up by them before. And they're pretty nasty. And then we've seen, you know, the videos and photos of the silver carp jumping. It's part of their startle response when they get scared, especially in shallow areas. When they can't go down, they go up, and their biomass gets very large very fast, so lots of individuals. And so those are things that are really real threats to our area. Both of those are found in parts of throughout the Red River, which is just a hop, jump, and a skip away from all these waterways.
So that's the invasive mussels you're talking about?
Yeah, on the right there. So if you go through Montana and Idaho, at every state border and throughout the state, they have boat check stations everywhere. They're bleaching your boats, they're cleaning your boats, they're drying your boats, they're doing anything they can to keep these mussels out. So we work really hard to make sure that our water source is clean and that anything we stock out to other areas doesn't have stuff like this. And so far, the Cane River, where we get our water source for the hatchery, does not have either of these species in it. But between boating and pumping, it's a really big threat to the whole area, and it'll affect us, but it'll affect everybody that's using or on the water as well. So these, again, just some photos. Zebra mussels, these are attached onto some algae, so if that gets into your ballast water or up in your prop, it's really easy to spread them from place to place. They just need a little bit of moisture to survive a long time. And then we've got the jumping silver carp over there, and people get hurt every year by those guys. Just some more photos of kind of the impacts. There's a boat prop, the top two, those are covered in zebra mussels after sitting in water that has them. And then again, the silver carp, you can see this person's trying to bow fish and they're about to get hit in the face with one jumping. And those fish can get 30 to 50 pounds. Okay, and then just a couple more pictures of the zebra mussels. This one always blows my mind. So this is Lake Mead. This is a brand new pipe that has never touched infested water. And these are pipes after 2, 4, and 6 months of being in infested waters. So people are like, oh, it can't be that bad. They can be really bad. And then they have economic impacts. Zebra mussels, they've estimated $3.1 billion over the past 10 years. And then local economy as well. People don't want to fish or put their boats there, or they can't afford to fix their irrigation pipes. They can't afford to fix their docks and pylons. They're getting injuries. I know in Michigan, they've closed multiple water treatment plants because they can't keep the pipes clean. They can't afford to keep them clean to clean the water. So they've closed them.
Is there anything that eats zebra mussels?
Not a lot. So in the Great Lakes, we have one of their native predators there, the round goby, but those are also an invasive species. So which came from the Caspian Sea. So things do over time kind of learn to eat them, but there's so much of them that it.
Will regular sunfish eat them?
They would probably try. They might be able to get some of the smaller ones, but they're attached to things, but bissel threads, they're really hard to pull off. So if they can't crush the shell themselves, they're not gonna be able to suck them in. I know they eat snails and stuff, but usually they can pull them in and work them around a little bit, and the zebra mussels would be a lot harder. They don't get very big, maybe 8 centimeters, so they're pretty small, but they're just nasty. So then we have our direct impacts. If they did come into the waterways for the hatchery, we may not be able to support the local recreational fisheries. If we have larvae from the invasive mussels coming through our waters, we might not be allowed to stock throughout the state. We might only be able to stock places that already have them, or we might not even be allowed to do that. And then it will affect some of our recovery of species, particularly the mussels or anything that's aquatic. The snapping turtles will probably be fine. The gopher tortoise are terrestrial, so they won't be as affected. But it'll actually change how we do things and then how the community uses the waterway. And then how do we prevent the spread of these invasive species? So we have our own control mechanisms. Usually it's visual, and we can test for different things. And then we have the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers kind of campaign, and that's kind of the drain and dry. So once you get out of the water, make sure you empty everything, let it drain out fully, and try to let it dry for a couple days before you go to the next waterway, especially if it's a known area with any of the invasives, really.
So in Louisiana, do we have any other invasive species in Louisiana?
Yeah.
Oh.
So the Red River has bighead and silver carp, and there are a couple areas where they've identified zebra mussels, but there's not a lot of research going on right now of exact locations of it. It's not something that's being fully monitored, but that's one of the things we want to look into over the next year or so, because there's some local entities that want to come from the Red River, but the filter that they were supposed to be able to use to clear the water before it comes into the Cane River, it's not going to work. It's going to get clogged up too much. So they just want to pull water in freely, but then they're almost guaranteed to pull in whatever's right there. And so we know that the silver carp would likely come in. We've seen those through the whole Red River, all of Mississippi. And then we know zebra mussels are in different parts of the Red River, but we don't know exactly how close they are to that pumping area. So that's one of the things we want to find out this coming year before we come to an agreement on how to fill the Cane River, because it needs some help to fill.
They're subject to low temperatures, it kills them, right? Because last year on, what's it, Archie up there, where the cows were refuge, they were dead by the hundreds. After we had that big freeze after Christmas,
Yeah.
I mean, just the whole water was just covered in them. So I guess we had to have a severe freeze to get rid of it.
Yeah, that could help. So zebra mussels are more common, and they have a higher temperature tolerance, and then but they can't go as cold. But the quagga mussels can actually go colder than the zebra mussels. So we found in the Great Lakes that as you get deeper, it switches to purely quagga mussels. So they're both a kind of a little bit different threat, but they hold the same niche in the waterways.
I was talking about the carp.
Oh, the carp, yeah.
I mean, the river was flood, there's everywhere. The water was covered the whole top of it.
Where are they native? Where are silver carp from?
They're from Asia. So
Like the rest of
yeah, they're commonly called Asian carp, but
Okay.
we try to call them invasive carp. So
They are.
Question, back on the mussels in our creeks here. Do the fish, is there ever a stage where like top minnows or small fish feed on the mussels when they're in like the sand and very small?
yeah, they'll get eaten up a little bit. Sometimes that because they're so small, it's more likely bycatch. So if they're trying to eat something else and they pull it in, but as they get bigger, they will get more targeted by different species and stuff. And then as adults, otters and beaver and nutria and different things will eat them. And then in other areas, there are fish that specialize in mussels.
Nutrient,
I believe they've found some evidence of them. If they're kind of up on the shore, they'll opportunistically grab them. And then so for the hatchery, what else do? We have environmental education. We have the aquarium building that's open to the public. It's just a small self-guided aquarium. It gives people the opportunity to see pretty cool species of fish that they may never see in the wild. We do a lot of mussel survey stuff, which is a little outside of our scope usually. Usually we're just production, but we've gotten into more of the research side of the mussel stuff. And then we do special events kind of like this, and different outreach and things like that. So we do a lot of stuff with the schools and the kids. Sometimes they come to us, sometimes we go to them. We love to take turtles and things that they can kind of interact with and just teach them about what we do and why it's important to the ecosystem as a whole. And then this is just our little aquarium. We've got some murals that were painted several years ago and a few displays. And then we work with the Caddo tribe to put up 2 kind of diorama displays because there is evidence that there were the tribes along where we are on the Cane River. So they actually excavated some areas and they found a burial ground and some pottery and some tools and stuff. So we had them come and bless the land and help us put together kind of a pictorial of what it may have looked like. So these are mussel surveys, and so this helps us figure out how our program is doing. We've been able to stock 1-year class of the Louisiana pearl shell mussels. We put out about 1,000 individuals, And Wednesday will be my 3rd year of seeing how those mussels are doing. So I work with the Forest Service, and we go out and we check for the juvenile. So this clipboard right here are ones that we found in the wild. These are ones that were tagged to ready to go out and be stocked. And so they were stocked at this size, and you can see how much larger a lot of these guys are. So that means they're growing and they're healthy. We found quite a few of them, which gives us really good hope that they're surviving well out there. Some of the tags we couldn't find, but hopefully we'll find some more this time we go out. We found a whole bunch of individuals that were never identified the first monitoring. We found them the second time, so we think they're actually burrowing further than our reader can identify them. And they're using that vertical space a lot more than we thought they might, which is really good. Special events, we do a fishing derby. We try to do it every year. We haven't been able to do it since COVID started. We weren't allowed to have that many people on site for a couple of years, and then because we weren't doing much with the fish, we don't have enough fish to do our broodstock program and have people fish for them. So we're a little bit behind, but we're hoping next year we will have our fishing derby back. It's free for the kiddos. They can take like 3 or 5 fish home usually, so it's a pretty good time. All right, so back to the mussels in a more general sense. Within the United States, there's about 300 species, and over half of them are having trouble. So they're likely state or federally listed. And so this picture is just, these are just some of the mussels you find in Wisconsin. And you can kind of get an idea of the different sizes and shapes and colors and textures and all the different things that go into identifying different species of mussels. It can be very tricky. So to the life cycle. So as I was saying, the pearl shell, they're more of a broadcast spawner. So they make lots and lots and lots of tiny ones, and they throw them up into the water column, hoping that they cross paths with the spawning pickerel, and they do their thing, and they hope everything's good. A lot of others have different mechanisms to get successful attachment, which is actually a better way of doing it. So this picture, it's a little hard to see, but we always ask people, how many fish do you count? So if you can see, I'll give you a second. So there's 3. So this is a fish, this is a fish, and this is a fish. And this is actually a lure on the mussel. So this right here is a mussel, this is an adult mussel, and this is a lure, which is part of their mantle tissue. And so this is a gravid female, and she'll display this lure when she's ready to have her larvae come out. And whatever will eat these darters, most likely a bass or a bluegill, will come in to eat this fish because it'll twitch it. It'll make it look like a fish kind of bouncing on the bottom. And as soon as it triggers that, it shoots all the glaucidia right into its mouth and its gills. So it directly puts them onto the fish. Now, if something hits it that isn't a host, it will just not attach and transform properly, but they'll do this multiple times throughout the season. So they don't lose all their glaucidia at once. And so hopefully over all those times they got triggered, they will successfully have attached to at least one host. And so it's really, really cool how close a lot of these lures look to things you find in the wild and how well they mimic things. And I know you guys know as fly fisherwomen, how important mimicry is. These things know the difference. And so certain traits get carried through over time. And you get different forms of what makes the best lure. So here we have another fish. It's a little different. This one looks more like maybe like a black-sided darter. This one has like a strong lateral line instead of spots. This looks more like a crayfish or crawfish, as you guys call them. And then they have conglutinate packages. So instead of having a lure attached to them, they build these little tiny packages and kind of float them out away from their own body. And so these are packages of the larvae. So when a fish eats that, it pops open and releases all the larvae. So these look like larval fish. These look like stoneflies and chironomids. These look like little worms. They have super conglutinates, which will actually come out on this like jelly string, and it may be several feet from the female mussel. So when a fish comes in to eat that, boom, load glaucidia right to where it needs to attach.
So the mussels make these lures?
Yep. So
Huh.
that's their way of getting to their host. It's really cool. So that being said, and like you brought up, the fish are equally as important as the muscle. We need the fish to have the muscle. Now in the lab setting, they have done in vitro work where they put them on a petri dish and been able to transform them, but it's very expensive, very tedious. And that's for muscles that are most imperiled, and we just need to have individuals to learn more about. So in our setting, we're not going to do that. And so this is kind of just that picture of, this is the lure, here comes the fish, and this white cloud is all the Glaucidia, just right into the gills. So now that fish is gonna have them all attached. So this looks kind of grainy. Those are all those little muscles insisted onto the gill filaments. And then this is it further under a microscope, so you can see them a little closer up. So that's what it would look like. In the wild, they typically will not become over-infested with the moving water and everything by the time they actually get to attach. But in the lab, we can definitely put too many on a fish and harm them. But in the wild, that's a lot less likely to happen. Fish are extremely important to mussels for their genetics as well. So if you have too many similar genes and alleles mixing, you end up bottlenecked, and then you actually have less success as a population or a group of that species. And so those fish are what actually moves around. So this picture right here, there's a mussel. This is its trail. It kind of started over here, made a loop-de-loop. They don't move very far. They'll live in a space less than the size of this room most of their life. So when they attach to the fish and they hang out on the fish for between 2 weeks to a month and a half, the fish is moving all throughout that whole water system. And so they just randomly drop off. Whenever they're ready, they start dropping off. And so the fish keep the genes mixed around in a local area, but with enough movement that they can persist. So why are mussels important then? So mussels are considered an indicator species for water quality, and they can actually improve water quality. A single mussel can filter up to 15 gallons of water per day. And so this just has a visual. They put several mussels in an aquarium and let it sit overnight, and you can see how clear it is compared to not having any mussels in it.
What was making it cloudy in the first place?
It's just a turbid system. It's like if you scooped out the Mississippi and you just said, that's what we got. And then the mussels make it look like that.
Okay.
So to a certain extent, that's good. This is more for a visual representation. Native mussels don't typically group together in such large masses and beds that they take all the nutrients out of the system. But with the invasive mussels, like the zebra mussels, their biomass can get so big that they deplete the nutrients for all the little fish and the invertebrates and stuff like that. So they play more into the natural balance of the systems that's developed over lots of years. And so when these outside species come in, they don't know how to play nice with that. They're also considered ecosystem engineers. So that means that they directly or indirectly modulate the availability of resources to other species by causing physical state changes in the biotic and abiotic. So basically, these guys will capture the organic matter, filter it while they're feeding, and they act as a heavy metal sink so that it will get put into some of their tissue and then their shell. Some of these heavy metals, they're natural in the system. They go up and down, but we also, as humans, add more to the system sometimes. So they help bring that down. It's a little bit safer for the humans to use. But in doing that, then they also process all that food, the algae and the bacteria and stuff that's floating around the water column. And when they excrete that, it directly puts that food for the benthic invertebrates and the small fish. So they're kind of taking the upper water column, bringing it back down for the lowest, feeding all our little guys, and then the fish take it back up, and then they bring it back down. So they help complete that cycle. Their shells provide substrate and algae and protection for larval insects. Some fish will dart in and out of them. Darters love to hide kind of behind them. And if you get a dense enough bed area, they can be considered an underwater garden. So fish will come to them because they're kind of like them during flooding. So they don't get as much scour and as much sediment pushed downstream because they're holding it together. So some of the reasons that they're struggling, a long time ago, they were our main source of buttons. So if you notice now, your buttons are a little bit shiny and iridescent. Well, they're made out of plastic now since around the 40s and 50s. And before that, they would go out, collect huge numbers of mussels, and then stamp them out of the shells. They just throw the guts out, stamp them, and then throw the shells. And so they took out such big numbers that a lot of species have had a hard time climbing their way back. And then that added to pollution, industry. We have a lot of infrastructure issues. So this is a perched culvert that is likely too small when the river is actually up that high. So then you have a velocity barrier for fish to move up to spread the genetics or get to the beds where the mussels are at. We have a lot of low head dams. And then we've got our invasive species. So these are 2 native mussels. And then these are zebra mussels that have completely covered them and are likely going to suffocate them if they don't get pulled off. So we have a lot of things working against us, but we go through a whole bunch of different kind of like models and strategies of, do they have a high recovery potential? And like, what's our threshold to keep working with them? So since these guys are local, they're doing okay. And we have the ability to likely produce enough other populations to get them back to a minimal number. They have a high recovery potential. So we are working with the pearl shell for that reason.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
And earlier you mentioned beaver dams being the problem. After Laura, Hurricane Laura, a lot of trees came, they blocked where we live. There's 2 creeks that come into Coachella Lake, and it blocked the creeks up like that, and I'm sure there were mussels up in there. Has that been an impact? That's something y'all looked at and tried to mitigate?
Yeah, we've looked at it a little bit. We've had, numerous big storms over the last few years that are a little more frequent than they've noted in the past. So that could become an issue. There is a natural pattern that these mussels have survived through for many years. And so this creek may flood and some mussels may die off, but then that creek's gonna do really good. And they may have reopened that one with the flooding waters. And so there's a little bit of a pattern that we want to keep as natural as possible. We've seen trees come over beds that we usually count. We just don't have access to them. If it was a really important one, we may try to clear it. We kind of just monitor to see what's going to happen. But a lot of times the mussels they're pretty good at going deeper, or if the water's high enough, it'll just push them downstream sometimes. So the beds will kind of shift. But it is something we have to take into account as we have these 50 and 100-year storms at 20 and 30-year time periods.
What about the drought?
Yeah, the drought's affecting a lot of stuff too. The mussels are more concentrated to the middle. There's some areas where it went down too fast and they got stranded. Sometimes there's groups available to go move those mussels, or they may take them into a hatchery setting until the water comes back up. But again, it's kind of that natural flow of things where there's only so much you can do, but we do have to keep an idea of those patterns. Sometimes it's kind of hard to put all this work into it and be like, oh, another flood or another drought, and you just have to do what you can.
You said Grant Parish was one of the areas where they're being.
Yeah, Grant
So
Ravines.
they changed the path of the Rodoli Creek
Okay.
from like, I think it flowed out of, maybe Ayat or Kisatchie, I'm not sure. What's the other one above Ayat?
Kisatchie?
Yeah,
It flows out of I believe.
Ayat, and they changed that, and I have to wonder if that could have affected, because that's a natural flowing creek.
Yeah, it's likely to have affected some kind of mussel. I don't know for sure if there's pearl shell in there. I don't know exactly where all the beds are at, but if they were doing any activities, they would likely have to, because there's endangered species or threatened species in there, they would have to work through a formal consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Well, this happened years ago.
Yeah.
So it used to be a nice, it did its own thing, and then they came and messed it up.
Oh, okay.
And a lot of that Gray Creeks area and Ayat and all that kind of fed into all that.
And that could be one of the reasons that we're seeing certain populations that are declining faster than others, but I'm not aware of that specific area.
Invasive species, how far north, I know they're in New Orleans, but like the apple snails, how far north have they gone?
Oh, I'm not sure their total range right now.
You gotta follow the Olympics.
I mean,
they're, even in Rampage Parish, you're finding birds now, so
Really?
hopefully not following snails, hopefully eating mussels. No, not these, you know,
The other
the
one.
regular, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, there's so many different species that, if they're not too local, I've only been here a few years, so I've still got a lot to learn with some of this stuff. But there's different agencies and groups that are monitoring that type of stuff. It's just outside of my scope right now. But I know in Michigan, that's one that was one of our, like high potential. So when I was doing early detection and monitoring in the Great Lakes for a while, so that was one of our look for this species. Yeah. Yep, and then we got the mud snails up there, the New Zealand mud snails.
it's really large, isn't
No, these ones are teeny tiny.
it? An apple snail.
The apple snails are huge, yeah. But the New Zealand mud snails are little teeny tiny guys, and they're trying to get felt waders banned up in Michigan. Because it transfers so much stuff. We also have Didymo, which is, we call it rock snot. And we have a lot of that gets transferred really easy on felt waders. So we ask people to pinch those waders.
Well, those gopher tortoises. He showed the range of them, I think, with that map, but they're all over Louisiana. So is that something different? Like we call them box turtles.
Yeah, so that's just something different, yeah.
Oh, it is, okay.
Yeah, box turtles are their own thing. The gopher tortoises are only found in the Pearl River watershed area here in Louisiana.
So what is the box turtle? Is it a type of tortoise?
It's a turtle.
A turtle, okay.
Yeah, it's a
All right.
mostly terrestrial turtle.
Okay.
They have a like a hinge on the bottom of their
Yeah,
shell,
mhm.
and so when they get scared, they close all the way up and hide in it. That's why they call it a box, because they're fully closed.
Got it.
They're pretty
Yeah.
cool. But they do look pretty similar. Any other questions? I know it's kind of a lot.
Where, I see that physical address, but, where on the Cane River are y'all?
We're only about a mile south of the city of, like, downtown Natchitoches.
Y'all are on old Highway 1, Highway 1 going
Yep.
up just before you cross.
Yeah, there's that big chevron right there
Yeah,
now. We're
yeah,
right,
I
that's,
went to that one.
yeah,
Carlson, they're about 200, 400 feet south of the first bridge you get to,
Yeah.
coming north on Cane River.
Yeah.
That's where their intake is.
So, has it expanded much?
the,
Fish hatchery itself?
no, like the size of the hatchery
Yeah.
is the same. We've had the same amount of acreage for
Okay.
a long, long time.
Okay.
I think the 53 ponds got finished in maybe the 50s.
Okay.
But our capacity has gone up and down depending on the needs for things. So there were some years we were doing pallid sturgeon, alligator gar, paddlefish, and then all the recreational stuff. And there were years where they had 11 million fish going out the door. And right now we're doing, I think, between 2 and 3 million fish. And then we have the endangered species work on top. So that's all pretty new.
Do y'all stock Cane River?
Not typically.
Okay. I've never heard of it.
Yeah, on purpose. Yeah.
Not on purpose.
Yeah.
Who is pushing water intake from the Red River into King River?
The Cane River Waterway Commission.
Why?
'Cause they,
Catch, I could probably talk to that a little bit better since I'm a
Yeah.
property owner up there and have been
yeah,
involved.
there's
It-
a lot
It's
of-
over a few years, probably before you got here, because of the fluctuation of the water on Cane River. They were trying to get to where we would keep it at a level, constant level. It's Cane River was basically produced to be an agricultural
Mhm.
river, so that, our lake, so that farmers could pull out of it. Well, when farmers pull a lot out, the lake goes down, then you get a lot of destruction on homeowners and erosion, a lot of erosion. They wanted to keep it more level, so they looked at pulling in from Hamilton Cove, which is off the Red River, but it's part of the Red River, but it's just off, bringing it in there into Cane River. And this is way too much of a conversation for that, but I can go through every bit of it with you, of
Yeah.
all the process that has gone on.
It's been going on a long time.
But the zebra mussel is the key to this whole thing of why it can't happen or why there are people on a lot of different sides of this argument. But
And
just
silver
so-
carp as well.
Yeah, so
Yes,
that's a big
they've never
one.
mentioned silver carp, but after hearing this, that is a huge
Yeah.
issue also.
So when all this started, we were asked for an opinion or recommendation. So we said, at this time, we don't think it's a good idea because of the mason carp and the zebra mussels. And so we sent that to the board and we the LADQ, and then the state has an opinion, and there's a bunch of opinions I got sent in. And so, they're kind of trying to figure out like, what's the best way to do this? And so that's why we want to figure out, okay, well, where are the zebra mussels? We know the silver carp are right in that range, which is still not a good thing, but where are the zebra mussels? Because the zebra mussels for the hatchery is what could really make it hard for us to ship stuff out, because the larvae are so small that if we use any of our own water, we have a high risk of sending them out as well. The silver carp would be easier to pick out and see among stuff, but we still have a risk of that too. They're around a lot of places. But yeah, so there's a lot of different users of the water. A lot of people affected in different ways. Some people want to use their boats. Some people don't want damages to this. Some people don't want the species. Some people just say hatchery filter, which is, if it's not going to filter the red, it's probably not going to filter the cane. So there's just a lot of different sides to it that we gotta figure out. And I think we just, from our perspective, we need a little more data on where exactly the species are at before we figure out the best way to move forward. Because I mean, we'd like to have more water in there too. We're users of the river too. Yeah.
How big did the pearl shell mussels get?
Oh, actually. So those are some of my fun little goodies that I brought in. So this is an adult pearl shell mussel.
Oh, wow.
So that one's got a hull print tag on it. You guys can pass it around, or you guys can come up and look at stuff a little bit later. I just have some shells of different species that you can find in there, so you'll see different sizes, shapes. These are mostly adult mussels. So
What's that one you right?
So this is called a 3-ridge, and this is called a giant floater. They look pretty similar, but when you flip them over especially, you can see that these are what we would call their teeth up here. They help with the hinge. And so this one has a really robust pseudocardinal and lateral tooth, and this one doesn't really have much of either. So we use those things to help identify, and then just the shell. You can see the obvious ridges right here.
So these are not pearl shell?
These are not pearl shell. No, these are pretty common species actually. A lot of people, you'll see these in the ponds and lakes, and they're all over. I'm surprised that's taking this long to ask. Yes, you can eat them.
Gotta ask.
So technically in Louisiana, they are classified under clams, and you could eat them. I've heard them compared to muddy rubber. If you do eat them, they are not the marine bivalves that you order at the restaurant by any means. So I wouldn't really recommend it unless you are in a survival situation. Most other states though, you can't take any mussels or shells because most people can't tell the difference between the common ones and the threatened ones. But here in Louisiana, we don't have the same rules.
So what are the ones in restaurants that you get when you order mussels?
Those are more like, they're the ocean ones, the marine ones, the brackish ones. They're a little bit saltwater. They taste better.
You haven't been in Louisiana long enough to understand they'll eat anything.
Oh, I know. That's why we still have
Put
those
some
rules
Tonys
here.
on it, it's perfect.
That's why
Yeah.
Probably fry it.
And then this is, I just brought some of our field sampling gear that they use. This is just a viewer. And so we can walk around and just use this to help us see the mussels. They'll be up at the top filtering and you can say, oh, there's one, pick it up and stuff like that. So we kind of wander around with this. A little dustier now. What's that? Oh, yeah. And then this is one of our aggregators. So we pit tag some of our mussels. And so, like I said, it's like that technology that your animals may have. And so we'll actually epoxy those onto the side of shells. So this is one that died at the hatchery before we stocked it, but it has a pit tag on there. So if I take this guy and now I have a number 982-091-06 yada yada, and so I can look back in the data if I find him in the wild and say, oh, we stocked him in 2020. He was 25 millimeters, now he's 46, still alive, and we know exactly where we put it. Maybe it's further downstream, so we can do that. And then
You said you epoxy a tag
yeah,
and it stains?
yep, it's a marine epoxy. So it works pretty good.
But the plant grows.
Right, but the muscle will grow outward.
Okay.
So this part is the original part and it'll get wider that way. So it's kind of like a tree. So instead of going from the middle out, it'll go from the top down.
All right.
So that part will stay.
Yeah.
And then this is our mega wand. So this attaches to another handheld. So we use this in the creek more often. And it's just kind of like a big metal detector, but it'll pick up these tags. So we just walk around in the shallow creeks and beep, we know what number. We can dig it up, look at it, see if it's still alive.
How far you have to dig?
This identifies about 7 to 8 inches max in there, so usually not too far. But that's why I was saying, we think they're using more vertical space than we assumed they might, because we waved that over the same areas the previous year and didn't detect some of these mussels, and we found 30 mussels that we never got the first time around. So we think they were just too deep for us to detect, which is great, which means our estimates of how many are surviving are actually low, and we have good numbers, so.
So those dudes actually go down there and just stay underground?
Yeah, so they live in pretty sandy areas, so the water still passes through. There's still some food and nutrients, and so they can go down and just burrow, and they can be fine for a while like that, for sure. And then this is my must-have clipboard that I take with me every time. Actually, I have a data sheet on there right now. I've got some resources and my supply list, and so if you guys want to look at this is how we know if the females are ready to be taken for larvae and stuff. You can see the difference in their gills. And then got my calipers, super glue. These are called hull print tags. That was on that shell I passed around. And that way we can also track them individually that way, can measure them. And then we have reverse pliers that help us to actually open the muscles. So we'll slide it in and carefully pry them open just a little bit. Yeah, if you guys have more questions or you just want to check out that stuff, feel free, or I can finally stop talking.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes life better, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Lindsay, are y'all the only national fish hatchery in Louisiana?
We are, yeah. Yeah, I think there's 2 or 3 state facilities. I know Booker Fowler, which is outside of Woodworth here. And then I think there is or was one on Toledo Bend and maybe one up by Monroe that does some stuff, but we're the only federal one. I think there's 71 total and most of them are found in the Pacific Northwest. They're all same country.
The snapping turtles. How much human predation? How much of that? Because I know a lot of people.
I don't know the exact numbers, but I do know Louisiana is one of 2 states that still has a fishing season on.
They do what?
That still has a fishing season for them. So here in Louisiana, you can take 1 per day per person with a fishing license. I think it's more common a lot further south, but it's a very real thing. Turtle soup is an everyday thing for some people. I've seen it on menus places. So if they do get listed, we're not sure how that will look for Louisiana.
Yeah, they're good to eat. I mean,
I've never had it. I haven't had the
Yeah.
opportunity, but I would try it. I wouldn't do it myself, but if it's already done, I'll try it.
It's good.
I used to always think when I was water skiing about
Yeah,
those
these
turtles being underneath there, like.
The thing that scares me is the people that go noodling, where they
Oh,
stick
yeah.
their hand in
Yeah.
for catfish. Those turtles live in the same spot.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm out.
well, they use steel rods with the turtles sometimes.
Yeah, they'll poke into the mud. That's how we had to catch them all out of those big ones. That's how we didn't find them in the ponds. You couldn't see them. You just had to clunk. Dig them out. It was fun.
I've seen guys come in with 10 or 12 of them in a row. How you doing? You've seen that, right? All right, we still got some other stuff to cover. So, any loose, don't leave.
When did first time in trouble?
So it would kind of. Yeah, so watch when I call.
I don't know if he wants them, I think he's just not a good shot.
I know what the first time.
It's just, you know, you got in trouble with me, I couldn't militarily do nothing to you.
I'm down in bars.
They don't grow fast, they get shortened together, you know, some of them grow faster.
How about big, how about land?
Like, strength is a winter.
I'm north.
Right.
Yeah, so go north. I mean, I don't know.
10, you can get more specific.
Right, yeah, so you're on the west side.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, yeah, but I mean, yeah, Natchez.
Yeah, so you come into Natchez.
Yes.
You know, when you turn at Dollar General right there. Okay. You go straight right.
Yeah.
I'm south of that.
Okay, all right.
Okay, ready whenever you are. Whenever you make the announcement.
That's all you got.
Are you going?
Three.
I'm surprised with that low. No, I bet, and then they went out. Yeah, came back. Did another.
Yeah, we get people saying, hey, we can talk about the hash rate.
If you do have a fishing bag.
Anyway, there you go.
Oh, really?
What else we have?